The NFL free agency period started last week, and there were a lot of players that went to different places and a lot of money was spent. Who were some of the winners and losers of the free agency period, and what were some of the big moves? Find out next as I talk about the NFL free agency frenzy on the AFC side. Hello, I'm Bailey Leisure, and today on my channel I will be talking about the NFL free agency period and my reviews and thoughts on it. I'm going to talk about the AFC, as this will be a two-part video, as I don't want this video being 20 minutes long. So I will talk about the AFC teams and what were some of the big moves that those teams made in this free agency period. So starting off in the AFC East. So the New England Patriots, they're typically in the Bill Belichick, Tom Brady era, have not been known to be one of the big spenders in NFL free agency, but considering Tom Brady is gone and the Patriots had their first losing season in almost 20 years, they had to make some moves, and they had going into this free agency. I think they were third as far as teams with most cap space, and boy did they spend pretty much in every area. The first notable move they made was re-signing Cam Newton to a one-year deal, which will go up to about $15 million if you include incentives and bonuses. When I talk about these deals, I'm not going to get fully into the details because a lot of these deals that were made in free agency were very bonus incentive and a lot of moving parts. But they did re-sign Cam Newton. Now he will probably likely go into the next season as their starting quarterback, but the Patriots could still make moves, whether it's in the draft or some move that we have not seen coming yet. Offensively, they weren't done in that area as they picked up the two big tight ends on the market, Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry. Jonnu Smith was really their first big move as they got him to a 4-year deal. Hunter Henry was kind of a surprise as they got him on a multi-year deal as well. I feel like the Patriots, hopefully with this combo, maybe are trying to replicate the on-field success that a decade prior with Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez. So there was that. The wide receivers, they added a couple wide receivers. Questionable how they spent. They got Nelson Aguilar on a 2-year deal. It's really going to be a question of what type of receiver you're going to get with Aguilar. Are you going to get the Raiders, or are you going to get the one that was in the later part of the Eagles in his time there? They also signed Kendrick Bourne from the San Francisco 49ers for a couple years as well. So the offensive line center David Andrews was a free agent, and he kind of tested the free agency market a little bit, but he ended up re-signing with the New England Patriots. They also they brought back Trent Brown as they got him in a trade with the Las Vegas Raiders. Defensive line, they beefed it up. They signed Henry Anderson and a couple other players. Probably the big part in free agency, in my opinion, other than the tight end position, was the linebacker core. After Kyle Van Noy left the Patriots and signed a multi-year deal with the Miami Dolphins, as a cap casualty, the Dolphins released him. The Patriots bought him back, I believe, on a 2-year deal. But the big move that they made in free agency, in my opinion, the one that stands out the most, is getting former Raven linebacker Matt Judon on a huge deal, 4-year deal, which I think is at $56 million, but that could be up more if you include incentives and bonuses. And then defensively, other defensive parts, they signed Jalen Mills from the Philadelphia Eagles, defensive back. And the Patriots hope, along with some of the players that are opting back in, considering they had a lot of opt-outs, that this team will improve and Bill Belichick can get back to where he was during the Brady era, and they can start competing in the AFC again with these moves. So the team that finally dethroned the New England Patriots, the Buffalo Bills, they did make a lot of moves. Probably one of the surprising moves was when they brought in former first-round draft pick Mitchell Trubisky on a 1-year deal to be the backup. I think it's a good fit as a backup, but you're hoping Josh Allen stays healthy and he's able to continue to develop into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. But as a backup, I don't think Trubisky's bad. They signed a linebacker. They signed Matt Milano. I think it's on a couple-year deal. And then after John Brown left, they brought in Emmanuel Sanders. I'm not sure of the terms on that deal, but as a replacement for John Brown, I think it's a really good signing I'm assuming a 1-year deal, and you can match him up very well with Stephon Diggs. So moving on to the Miami Dolphins, last year they were one of the big spenders in NFL free agency. They were somewhat. They kind of made some surprising moves. They cut Kyle Van Noy after getting a multi-year deal, and he went back to New England, as I stated previously, as a backup to Tua. As of right now, they brought in Jacoby Brissett, which I think is not a bad move. They got a couple wide receivers. They signed Will Fuller to a one-year deal. A lot of wide receivers in this free agency got one-year deals when I thought they would get multi-year deals. But considering the salary cap went down, I'm kind of not surprised by that. They traded for 2020 first-round pick Isaiah Wilson from the Tennessee Titans and then released him right after they traded him. Yeah, that's not. He's even 1 year in the NFL, and he's looking like a bust. They signed center Matt Skura, and then they traded from the Texans. They got Beandrick McKinley for Shaq Lawson and a 6th-round pick. So Miami made a couple moves. They didn't make a big splash, but they were 10-6 last year. They're hoping that Tua is able to develop and they can start competing in the AFC East. The New York Jets have kind of been somewhat of an interesting team. They had a lot of cap space, and the Jets, they usually always have this, and they have trouble developing these players and transitioning the free agent signings and are able to win games. The Jets kind of didn't make that many moves. The wide receiver position, they signed Keelan Cole from the Jaguars on a 1-year deal. They did sign one of the top free agent wide receivers on the market in Corey Davis, which I think is not a bad move. They signed defensive end. They beefed up that defensive line. They got Carl Lawson. They also got Sheldon Rankins. They signed from the Raiders defensive back LaMarcus Joyner. And as I'm recording this video, they just signed veteran from the Eagles, Vince Curry. And then they just signed from both the 49ers and the Falcons, Tevin Coleman. Robert Saleh, the new head coach for the San Francisco 49ers, did coach him when he was in San Francisco as the defensive coordinator, so he'll be going to a familiar territory. We don't know what the Jets are doing. We don't know if they're going to make a move for another quarterback. As of right now, Sam Darnold is their quarterback, but we don't know what moves they're going to make, what they're going to do in the draft. So, the Jets' offseason has kind of been a bit of a question mark. And moving on to the AFC North, I'll talk about this in one take. The Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens were not very active. I feel like the Ravens should have been a little bit more active, at least in the wide receiver position. They really need a big wide receiver to help Lamar Jackson out, considering they had, one of the teams last in the NFL in passing. But they didn't really make any moves. They were pursuing Juju Smith-Schuster, which I will talk about him in a minute. But the Ravens didn't really make any moves. They re-signed Pernell McPhee to a 1-year deal. They re-signed Derek Wolfe, which I think is a really good move for them to keep that defensive line. And then they signed offensive guard Kevin Zeitler to a 3-year deal. Pittsburgh, they brought Ben Roethlisberger back, but they've kind of been not in a great cap situation. They did re-sign Juju Smith-Schuster, as I was about to allude to earlier, to a 1-year deal. He was another wide receiver that decided to just take a 1-year deal. The Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens were pursuing him, and apparently both those teams offered him more money, but I guess he took a discount and returned to Pittsburgh. They lost a couple players. The Steelers did. They lost Bud Dupree, and they just released one of their top corners in Steven Nelson. So I don't know what they're going to do. They re-signed Cameron Sutton, but I don't, with Ben Roethlisberger kind of on the decline, I don't know if Pittsburgh is going to be equipped to compete in their division next season. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals, I really was expecting the Bengals had cap space, and I was really expecting them to go heavily off after offensive linemen, especially in the wake of the big Joe Burrow injury that happened last season. Other than Riley Reif, which I think is a good deal on a 1-year deal, they didn't really make any moves. I'm assuming they're going to make much more upgrades in the draft. But they didn't really make any other moves. AJ Green, the longtime wide receiver for the Bengals, he left. He went to the Arizona Cardinals. They really did try to upgrade defensively. They gave Trey Hendrickson, which I think is a good signing, but they gave him a lot of money at 4 years and $60 million. They signed Eli Apple, which is... And then they got Mike Hilton from Pittsburgh, which I think is a really good deal for them. And then, but they kind of, in this free agency period, I feel like they went after defense when they really should have went after more of the offense, but maybe they do that in the draft, as I stated before. And then the Cleveland Browns, who were the team next to the Ravens that got the farthest in the playoffs in the AFC North. They made really heavily went after defense. They did re-sign wide receiver Rashad Higgins to a 1-year deal. But defensively, they beefed up their defensive line. They got Malik Jackson. They signed Takaris McKinley. Defensively in the secondary, they signed Troy Hill and John Johnson to multi-year deals, and then they re-signed kicker Cody Parkey, who's really had a much-needed transformation going to Cleveland after his time in Chicago, which was very infamous. But Cleveland, going after defense, which I think is a really good move. Beefing up that defensive line along with already having Myles Garrett. They did want J.J. Watt, but they lost out to the Arizona Cardinals. But I liked what Cleveland did defensively, and I think they're looking good going into next season. Moving on to the AFC South, the Indianapolis Colts, they made one of the big splashes for quarterback trades when they traded, Frank Reich, the former offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, at least at the time when they won the Super Bowl. He and quarterback Carson Wentz they acquired him from the Eagles for I believe it was a third round pick in 2021, and then a conditional second round pick in 2022, which could turn into a first round pick. But I think it's a good, at least for the Colts, considering how much the Eagles had to eat in the cap situation. I think it's a good deal for them, and I think hopefully Carson Wentz can benefit, in a much better organization right now. And, hopefully the change of scenery does him good. They kind of, only the other moves that the Colts made, they re-signed some of their players. They re-signed Marlon Mack. They re-signed Xavier Rhodes, cornerback. And then as I'm recording this video, they just re-signed T.Y. Hilton to a 1-year deal. Another wide receiver that just took a 1-year deal. So the Colts, I thought they made some decent moves, bringing some players back. And hopefully Carson Wentz, can get them to the playoffs this season. Moving on to the Jaguars, who currently have the number 1 overall draft pick in the 2021 NFL draft, and I think it's almost assumed that they're going to take Trevor Lawrence. So what would they do? So they signed running back Carlos Hyde to a 2-year deal. They got a couple wide receivers. They got Marvin Jones on a 2-year deal. I think it was a good deal for Marvin Jones, as not a lot of wide receivers got multi-year deals in this free agency. Jamal Agnew. They also signed Philip Dorsett. They traded for Malcolm Brown, which I think is an okay deal. And then they got a couple cornerbacks. They re-signed Sidney Jones, and then they got one of the top cornerbacks on the market from the Seattle Seahawks. Shaquille Griffin on a 3-year deal. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans, they kind of were in a bit of a cap issue. They surprisingly cut defensive back Dory Jackson and Malcolm Butler, which was kind of a big question mark. And then they gave probably some of the most money on this free agency market, signing Bud Dupree to a 5-year, $85 million deal. And then they also signed cornerback Janoris Jenkins. So I don't know what the Titans are doing. I think that it was a bit of an overpayment to Dupree. He had a really good season, but he is going to be coming off an ACL injury. And then we have the Houston Texans. We know the drama, if you've been reading on it or watching news or whatever, the drama that's going on with Deshaun Watson, him winning out, and as of recently, within the last week, his the off the field or out of football, issues he's going through with, the lawsuits and everything like that, involving, stuff I'm not going to get into. But the Texans signed so many players, I can't even talk about all of them, and I really think it's more on quantity over quality. Not every deal is bad, but just where the Texans are, how much of this is going to make a difference, because they're right now a train wreck. They did get a couple quarterbacks, which is probably a good thing. Even if Deshaun Watson stays with all the legal issues he's going through, maybe he gets suspended if he ends up staying with the Texans. They traded for quarterback Ryan Finley from the Bengals. They signed Tyrod Taylor to a 1-year, $5.5 million deal, which I think is a decent deal. They added a couple running backs. They restructured David Johnson's contract. They got Mark Ingram, who I don't know how much he has left in the tank, on a 1-year deal. They also signed Philip Lindsay, which I think is actually really probably the best deal that they made in free agency. They signed Dante Moncrief and Andre Roberts. Yeah, that's gonna totally make up for DeAndre Hopkins. That trade, that was a train wreck. Offensive line, they traded for Marcus Cannon and signed Justin Britt. Defensively, not a couple moves actually. They traded for Shaq Lawson with the Dolphins, and trade I just talked about, and they also defensively they signed Christian Kirksey. He's got some injury issues, so we'll see what happens there. And then defensive backs, I do kind of like them getting Terrence Mitchell and Desmond King, but I don't know what's going to go on with the Texans next season. And then moving on to the AFC West, the final division I will talk about in this video. The Kansas City Chiefs kind of made, it was kind of controversial considering they're coming off the Super Bowl loss in which their offensive line play looked horrible. Eric Fisher suffered an Achilles injury in the AFC Championship game. They decided to cut him. He's got a long road ahead in recovery, but I'm kind of surprised they cut him. They also released Mitchell Schwartz. I know he had an injury, but I'm kind of surprised on that move. They did sign a couple of offensive linemen, though. They got one of the top free agents on the offensive line in Joe Thuney and Kyle Long, who came out of retirement. They signed him to a 1-year deal. But, they still need some moves, and I definitely think in the draft in the first round, they probably will go after offensive line. And then we move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't know what the hell they were doing as far as free agency was concerned. Offensive line, they really let go of a lot of people. They traded Gabe Jackson to the Seattle Seahawks, and then they did re-sign Richie Incognito, but the big surprise move that they made was initially they announced that Rodney Hudson, a Pro Bowl center, I think Pro Football Focus has him graded as one of the best centers, if not the best center in the last 5 seasons since 2015. They were initially release him, but probably a day later, they decided that maybe we can get some kind of value for him, and they ended up trading him to the Arizona Cardinals for a 3rd-round draft pick. Probably a good move on them. Not getting rid of Rodney Hudson. I think he makes the team weaker, departing from him. But it would have likely been the Kansas City Chiefs would have pursued him. So it's probably good that you trade him to outside of the AFC, just to make sure he doesn't go to, he goes to your division rival. They signed Nick Martin, another offensive lineman. Defensively, they have some secondary issues. They really beefed up their defensive line, but I don't know if it's going to help the secondary because they really need a veteran cornerback. They signed Yannick Ngakoue, Quentin Jefferson, and Solomon Thomas. The Los Angeles Chargers, they didn't make a lot of moves, but I think they really made some impactful moves. Building up the offensive line is very important, especially for a young quarterback like Justin Herbert. And they made some nice moves. They got the top center on the market in Corey Linsley. They paid him a lot of money at 5 years, $62.5 million. They also signed Matt Fiedler to a multi-year contract. Other than that, not much. I think the only other move I really noted is that they signed tight end Jared Cook to a 1-year deal. And finally to the Denver Broncos. They actually had a really good offseason, you think about it. So they franchise tagged Justin Simmons, and they just re-signed him to a big contract. A multi-year contract. Kyle Fuller, who was released from the not the Bills, the Chicago Bears, surprisingly, probably just because of cap issues, they were able to get him on a 1-year deal, which I think is a really good get for their secondary. They re-signed Kareem Jackson on a 1-year deal, $5 million deal, which is interesting considering I think they were most likely going to move away from him, but they ended up re-signing him. They signed defensive tackle Shelby Harris, re-signed him, I think, to a 3-year, $27 million deal. And then they also signed Ronald Darby to a 3-year, $30 million deal. So the Broncos, I think also they picked up Von Miller's option. So, if he's able to come back healthy, that's going to be really important. So, defensively, the Broncos made some really good moves, but I still have question marks offensively, and if Drew Lock is going to be the main solution as a franchise quarterback for the Broncos. What were your thoughts on the AFC part of NFL free agency? Leave in the comments section below. As always, follow me on Twitter at Laser96 and at Bill Laser. Click like if you like the video and subscribe if you like the content on my channel. Stay tuned as the NFC Part 2 video will be coming out on the NFL free agency, so stay tuned for that in the next day or two. And then stay tuned next week as I will be working on my annual MLB predictions video, as I will be giving my predictions on the upcoming 2021 MLB season. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.